Professor Timothy William Waters, do I have your permission to record?
Yes, you do.
Okay. So on the Skype call or on the phone with us today is Professor Timothy William Waters. He's a professor at Indiana University. He's a professor of law. He also works at the Constitutional Democracy Center, a Harvard Law graduate with a master's degree in international affairs, who's written on Catalonia independence in Scotland independence in 2016, Calexit independence in 2016, Catalonia in 2018, and recently published a book called Boxing Pandora, Rethinking Borders, States, and Secession in a Democratic World, which just, if I'm not mistaken, finished up a symposium of people reviewing the book, Professor. Is that correct?
That's right. It was on a blog called Balkanization, which is run by Jack Balkan from Yale University.
Okay.
Normally about constitutional issues, but they had a special symposium on my book and on a book, which I think you've also interviewed the author of, Frank Buckley, who wrote a book called American Secession.
I got to ask, is this normal for there to be symposiums on independence and secession amongst academics in America? Do you recall a previous symposium, or is this kind of a new thing?
Certainly, it's been a subject that's been talked about for a while. I mean, this site where I did this has symposia fairly often on different subjects on secession and independence. That's pretty rare. But you know, it's a relatively, as you doubtless know, it's a relatively marginal topic within political science, within law.
Right.
But I think it has gotten some more attention in recent years. I would hesitate to say that there's any trend to it. There have been certain cases like Catalonia and Scotland that have gotten more attention, and that may be part of what's driving it. Although this one was very focused on American issues, given the nature of the other book in the symposium.
Nice. Okay. Well, let's get right into the book. So I ordered the book. It's coming. My understanding, though, of the book is that I went to JSTOR and looked it up. It seems there is a chapter on the boxes we live in, which is about you're proposing a new right of secession, I think, where a group of people in a state can hold a vote. And if a majority of them says we want to be independent, the host nation has to treat that in good faith and negotiate. And if people hold the vote in an area, they have an inherent right to be seen as having a right to form their own country, regardless of if they are a ethnic or cultural union. Is that right? Is that what you're saying, Professor?
Mr. Evans, I actually can't answer that question because I could barely hear it. I think I heard what you were saying. So let me just, if I understand what the question was about, what the book is about, I can speak to that. That basically, yes, what I'm arguing in the book is for the idea of developing a right of secession, which would be the right of individuals to form a group inside a state to make a claim for the beginning of a process of secession, which would involve a vote, a referendum or a plebiscite on the territory of an existing state. And if they were to win by a majority or a supermajority in that defined territory, that would begin a process of good faith negotiations for exit. So that's what I'm calling a right of secession. It's really a right to negotiate, to hold a vote and negotiate your secession. But we could shorten that to a right of secession. That's what I'm proposing. Much of the book is about describing what the existing norms and practices around states and their territorial integrity are, what's wrong with them, and then why I think an alternate rule might make sense. And the last thing I'd say about that is I do frame it as a right, but that's partly just as a sort of a strategic frame. The symposium we just had, for example, several authors in there made excellent points about why it might be better to have something based in politics and practice rather than a very rigid right. I actually don't disagree with that, but we live in a world in which the language of rights, civil rights, human rights, constitutional rights is omnipresent, highly useful, and I think it is the most sensible frame to use to draw on the existing human rights framework to make make this claim. And the last thing I'd note about that is I approach it as a question of international law. I happen to be an international lawyer, but I do that for a particular reason. My argument in the book is that the existing system already has a set of rules that get in the way of people making claims for secession when they ought to be able to. And
Right.
that I want to propose a new rule or right, not because I love rights and rules, but because we need to have an alternative to the one we currently have, a place which is, in a sense, a place outside the existing state that, a point of diplomacy or power that groups can point to when they're negotiating with their own state. It's like creating a triangulation between minorities, their state, and something outside it. So it's the same model we use for human rights. That's why I want to talk about the idea of there being a right, an international right of secession.
Can you hear me now? Is that more clear?
It was just breaking up a lot. I think I gathered the question, but it was cutting in and out.
Well, you answered it perfectly.
Are you able to hear my answer?
Oh, your audio's coming out clean. Your audio and video are coming out clean. And I got everything plugged in, so I don't know.
It may be on my end, Mr. Evans, so let's do the best we can.
Thank you, Professor. I did find it interesting that I think you were saying a lot of experts say, hey, international borders are defined, and that's what keeps world security. And I think what you were saying was actually those borders sometimes cause insecurity. Here's an ethnic group that felt like, I have a right to have a nation. And basically the UN through World War II, through the 70s said, if you weren't a colony or an existing nation, no, you don't have a right to be a nation. And that creates all sorts of conflicts. Was that roughly what you were saying, Professor?
Yeah, that's a key part of the book. That's an argument that I try to develop in the first few chapters in particular, that absolutely the sort of most common intuition widely shared by academics, policymakers, is that highly stable, rigid borders are actually stabilizing for global politics. And the main thing I want to critique in the book is to look at whether that's really true or not. I have my doubts. So really half the book is about looking at whether that set of assumptions is testable and true. And I argued that it's actually very hard to test, but that there are indirect reasons to think that it may not actually stabilize politics the way we think it does. I want to make one clear qualification. My book is about territorial integrity. There's one piece of that practice that we should keep, and that's the cross-border part. So the rules since World War II that limit cross-border aggression, use of force across borders, these are very good rules, I think, and we should keep them. The problem is that we've also got a set of territorial integrity norms that allow states to resist peaceful claims for revision of their own territory, their borders, by their own people. And that's the part that I think we legitimately ought to challenge. That's the part I think where rigidity actually can produce instability in those places in which there is a community. It could be ethnic, it could be religious, linguistic, it could be purely regional or political, identity-based in some way, that feels itself to be part of a different country or nation, ought to be its own state, and yet is, in a sense, trapped in someone else's state. That's the context that we've created and sort of made more rigid since World War II. And our entire system is based on the premise that those borders shouldn't change, and that therefore we should fix or solve or ameliorate those kinds of problems only inside the existing units, with human rights, with democracy, all things that I favor. My argument, though, is that there are situations in which the existing borders, in a sense, lock into place communities that are made permanent structural losers inside their own societies. And we ought to have a way to let them peaceably negotiate an exit. So that's the essential critique that the book raises. And I stress again,